Hello, my goobers and goonettes. What is going on? This is another. Oh my God! It's the Collective podcast.
The Collective?
The Collective podcast. The only collective, not the Chaos Collective. Don't get confused. The only legitimate, orderly collective. Hey everyone. What's going on?
Isn't the Chaos Collective a cult?
Some shit like that. They're like the anti-collective from.
I thought
from
they
what I've gathered.
collapsed. I thought it was a 4-day project.
It's kind of like the Empire in Star Wars, where like they exploded and then now they've returned as like a more radical version of themselves.
Somehow the Chaos Collective has come back.
Yeah, exactly. And all they do is talk about Ash. Anyway, Ash is W. Emily. Yes, speaking of Emily, hello, Emily. I'm glad to have you on the podcast today. Emily is here to talk to us, yap with us about what it's like being a nurse and also being a communist, such as yours truly. We've been doing this for over a year now, and I have not had the opportunity to really have an in-depth conversation with another communist nurse. I'm very excited to talk about this because I feel in so many ways nurses can be one of the groups of people that can be radicalized the most, but at the same time, I have a lot of critiques of nurses and nursing culture, particularly as it leans, in my opinion, towards petite bourgeois. So I'm interested to get your opinion about that. But let's go through the comments real quick because we got a lot of stuff that just came through. Ash is currently crying. That's fun. I hope you have some tissues there. Luis, oops, I was in a collective, the collective. Yeah, aren't you supposed to be here? Bean says Emily. Shout out to Lumpy and W communist nurses. Yeah. Okay. So
was Lumpy supposed to be here?
Lumpy just does whatever they want now at this point. They're like, my position's solidified. I do whatever I want. So basically, I wanted to just get into a few things. I have a very loose outline if we get lost in the sauce, but I kind of think we should just pick up where we were. So we were just discussing the nutritional habits of nurses. And I feel like this is actually a good segue, right? Because one of the things that we have to talk about a lot in Marxist spaces is the idea of food insecurity, the lack of nutrition, food deserts. How would food be cultivated in a post-revolutionary society? So as a night shift nurse, evidently my diet consists of mostly Newport cigarettes, Collective sponsored by Newport, and Monster energy drinks. And you were saying, Emily, when you worked night shift, you were what was it that you were eating again?
I had at least 2 energy drinks a night, and I probably smoked at least half a pack of cigarettes. Yep. But also like donuts, chocolates. There used to be a lot of donuts and stuff at the nurses' station down the hatch.
Oh yeah.
Sugar and caffeine.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. The sugar, thankfully, I've been able to stave off. But like my brain is so chaotic that like I forget that I smoke cigarettes a lot of the time. So like it would be like hour 9 of 12. And I'll be like, why am I so fucking like agitated? And it's like, dude, you're an addict. You were an addict this whole time.
You're in withdrawals.
And you've been in withdrawals for 8 hours, and you're snapping at everyone. Yeah.
I'm just like, why are people pissing me off? But no, that explains it. But anyways, so what I wanted to get into, I guess my sort of first question. First, Emily, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh. I don't know if I like that question. It's too open-ended for me. Oh, so I originally went to school to do psychology. That's what I was interested in studying. And I was probably also like trying to figure out my own brain, what was going on. And I quit that track and I dropped out of school. And then I went back to go into nursing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I did that. I was a CNA, and then I got my practical nursing cert and my license, and then I was an RN. I got an ADN, and then I went back to school to get a BSN. So I kind of did like all the way around the elbow to get to the ass academic plan.
So I'm currently doing that now because not quite as a CNA, but I worked in like group homes. Basically doing CNA stuff, just not certified. So I was an aide for about 5 years. Then I've been doing my practical nursing. I've been doing that for going on 3 years now. And now I'm just enrolled to go back to get my RN. So yeah, I'm making I'm doing the same thing as you did. So I'll be more broke and more bullshit because
Yeah.
as we're going to talk about, there's basically going to be zero nurses. Well, there basically are zero nurses now, and it's only going to get worse. But all right, cool. So do you feel like did nursing radicalize you, or were you already radicalized
No,
and became a nurse?
I was kind of radicalized before then. So after I went to school to get a degree in psychology, and I didn't finish that. I didn't want to get a master's, and also it just wasn't the right field for me. Things just started to not feel right, and really it's because of white supremacy, and that's what the system is based on. But I didn't quite get all of it, and I also didn't get all of the class consciousness. So I was kind of drawn towards there. And then I got a job. I started working in education at a college, which was really cool. And that's really when I started to learn like a bunch of theory and stuff. The reason that I went back, I needed a job that was going to pay me, that would work for my schedule or to have different options. So I chose nursing. Also because I always wanted to work with people because I felt like I was going to make a difference. But now I'm to the point in life where I'm like, yeah, probably not going to be able to make a difference because the system is designed so that we can't really help people.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, we
exactly.
can still try.
Well, yeah, that's the only thing we really can do, as individuals. But at the same time, as individuals, if we're working in a system brought on by capitalism and white supremacy, that we'll never really be able to make that breakthrough. We'll never really be able to help people on the level that we really, we really want to. So for me, I was already, I've talked about this a little bit before, but I'll kind of speed run it. When I was in high school, I was a lib, Democrat, voted. I didn't vote in high school. I was, supported Obama, all that stuff. I thought America, did bad stuff in the past, but now they're better. As I transitioned to college, I started getting into communism, but that was more like meme communism. Like I didn't get it. I didn't know theory. I didn't know who these people were. I remember once I made a really cringy Facebook status that was like, I'm a communist, but not like the USSR. Like I was just, saying bullshit that didn't make any sense. So, Ivan. Anywho, so yeah, as I became an aide, and I was working with the developmentally disabled, I did see a lot of stuff that I think definitely did push me in a direction of radicalization. Seeing how these people were basically being pawns for Medicare and Medicaid, and being kept alive when, I mean, they should be kept alive, but being kept alive not because of the goodness of our hearts of them just being humans, but because they're cash cows, because the organization is getting kickbacks from billing, by us saying Billy typed wash his hands, and he's alive, see, and then agency gets money. I talk about that more on our episode where we discuss being disabled and being a Marxist. So, as I progressed through that field, I definitely got more and more radicalized. I left the field. I got my first nursing job, which was mostly administrative work, which I think I saw a lot more bullshit in that field in terms of like just how much people don't care and just how much fraud actually happens. And then that definitely like just kind of skyrocketed and coincided with us finding Collective, and the rest is history. So yeah, so I feel like one of the things that I think most Americans can relate to, and we see it now, obviously in the news, with what allegedly Luigi Mangione did to the United Healthcare CEO. So like most people are aware to some extent, how messed up our healthcare system is. But you, in your experience, like, what do you think is something that people, like the laymen who aren't in the field, who aren't in nursing, don't may not, really understand in terms of like how bad it actually can get?
Yeah, I don't think that the average person understands what's going on in the medical system, and you'll see people's perspectives based on their own privilege and ability to access the system. So, like, I got my first job as a practical nurse at a state hospital, and this happened to be, it was a mental hospital, but this happened to be adolescents that I was working with. And I was immediately thrown back, especially I actually think it's a good thing that you don't have a lot of that nursing theory bullshit to try to decolonize yourself from if you already were in nursing and going, because there's a lot of that holistic care nursing and nursing school, and they really teach you about whole holistic care and how we're supposed to meet the needs of all the people, and we really buy into it. But it's not even possible in the system. So even our educational programs are set up with this white supremacist view that is just not real. So, going
Yeah.
into the system, I thought that too. And then they would just straight up be like, yeah, well, we don't treat borderline personality disorder because it doesn't have like an easy fix. And the state is never going to pay for people to go to like DBT. So it was just the state mental hospitals. They're not even doing any of our therapeutic models. And we've always been taught that everything has got to be about like evidence-based practice. So why are we not using evidence-based practice in our medical system? And it was just one thing. If disabilities, people that have special needs, it's just one thing after the other. And I had to get out of there. First of all, like, it was underpaid, but it was a dangerous job. And because the state wasn't willing to pay people to work. And actually, like, the state has lost accreditation and also all federal funding. That's like currently where it's at, because they couldn't, they wouldn't get their act together. But it always comes down with the state to money. They've never been willing to spend the money to provide the care that the people need. Then I went into geriatric nursing, like skilled nursing facility. I worked on the rehab floor because I could do wound care, and I was an RN and I had to do the assessments, but sometimes I was the only RN in the house, and I saw that their needs weren't getting met either. And basically what it comes down to is we have chemical restraints and we have gaslighting. And that's kind of like what patients in the system are getting because we can't meet their needs. And this was like a more well-to-do place, a retirement village. So these people had more money than the average person. And then I went into the ED. I started doing emergency department nursing, and it became more evident than ever that we could not do our jobs, that we did not have the capability to meet anyone's needs, because the people need their basic needs met. They need housing, they need safety, they need adequate nutrition. And no, they're not getting it from the food bank. And they also need adequate health care. So many people come into the emergency department because of EMTALA. And EMTALA, the federal law, is the only reason that they have any access at all. They don't have PCPs. They don't have, because it's not available to them. So I think a lot of people think that it's a lot better than it is. And a lot of people that tend to have that idea is because they have privilege. They have their medical needs met.
Yeah.
And so they think, of course, this is what it's like for everyone. But they don't realize that in the United States, we practice social Darwinism. And the intention was never to meet anybody's needs. Yep. It was, you're going to expire.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me run it back from nursing school. So you're absolutely right. So for, even you guys on the panel, I don't think I've ever even brought this up because I didn't really think about it. But yeah, so nursing school it's so cookie cutter, and it is based in white supremacy, and it's based in holistic medicine that is very much coming from, I would say, like the 1950s and 1960s, but it even goes farther back than that. It goes back to the finding of the practice of nursing. So the sort of mother of nursing is this person named Florence Nightingale, who was a nurse who fought in the Crimean War, basically, patched up soldiers in the 1800s. Yeah, not a good person. And there was a joke in nursing school, because I went to nursing school with mostly brown and black people, that Florence Nightingale would hate to see us graduate because, we're not white people. And we were people from all over the world who came to school. But anyway, in order to get into school, even the practical nursing, sort of the, you know, what's considered the lowest on the rank of the nursing hierarchy, the immediate cost is insane. For me, it cost about, tuition alone was $14,000. And that didn't include books or time or gas or food or anything. So I probably spent about $30,000 to get my practical nursing license. And I met so many people who had to drop out mid school because they couldn't pay the next bill. And then they're fucked. They're done.
Yeah.
They have
That's
to
the end
wait
of it.
until the next
You just have loans
year.
and
Yeah. So
if you can get
wanna
your
talk-
seat back, you have to wait.
if you can get your seat back, exactly, because it's based off your grades and it's based off if there's room. So we see a lot in nursing where there's for the lack of a better term, what I can say is simply myths about people and stereotypes about people when it comes to the kind of people you're going to see. So I remember when we were talking about when we did our mother and baby or labor delivery, whatever it was called, section, we were talking about mothers who are addicted to drugs. So we started to talk about, and this is the teacher started talking about the use of crack cocaine. In the textbook, I don't even want to say it on the podcast because it is a slur, but they started refer to
Collective canceled.
the letter C babies, you know?
Yeah,
and she just kept like saying it over and over again. And this was like a white lady. And eventually this girl in the room was like, can you stop saying that? Like, that's a slur. Like, you understand that like that term, you know, C babies is directly tied to like Reagan welfare queens and like immediately not only discriminating against the mother who, you know, why is she addicted to crack in the first place, but now her baby, you're treating the baby. They're like one of the main things about, you know, when it comes to dealing with a child like that is like basically molding this freshly born baby is like they're telling you they're going to be a nuisance. You got to treat this baby like they're like an aggressive drug addict. I'm like, it's a baby.
Yeah,
like,
no hope in life.
A newborn.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a perfect illustration for like white supremacist nursing instructors because you hit it. That's all it is in nursing school. Yeah, well, and we also have the evidence year after year that Black women have the worst outcomes in our medical system because of racism. It's just about racism, and they continue. And you see it with their children. Their children are also demising a lot more than any other race.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. I want to talk about something in particular here. So, you know, I kind of explained to you a little bit about the background of exactly where I work, and I won't get into that on live, obviously, because, you know, duh. But basically, you know, we get a lot of people who, you know, who don't have, you know, papers or whatever. And there was this one person one time who didn't speak the language, you know, didn't look like the local population. And they had a traumatic brain injury. So, you know, G2 fed on oxygen, you know, all this stuff. And I remember, you know, whenever we would log on to work, you know, there would be a communications board, you know, a bulletin board, people just write whatever. And I saw that the social worker had written, so-and-so seems to do very well when they're socializing with other people and when they're brought out of their room and hanging out with people. And it's like, yeah, he's not, he's a person. Just because he doesn't talk or doesn't look like you, what, you just left him in the room in the dark just to rot away. But I'm not exaggerating. That's what happens.
With a wheelchair alarm. So if they try to transfer, they get them, or a bed alarm. Yeah, or chemical restraints, but usually a variation of all of them.
So here's the thing with my thing with the chemical restraints. I often have the opposite problem where we can't get appropriate medication. So this is for the same person. For example, they are in a lot of pain, or they were in a lot of pain. They're not with us. And we would talk to the provider because they used to have oxycodone prescribed, and basically the doctor was like, oh, they don't need it. And my whole thing is like, this is a guy who all they can do is sit and watch TV and rot, and they're in pain because his suture lines have collapsed and you can see inside his head. Why the hell are we not giving him drugs? who cares if he's high as a kite? Like, why are we in this, like,
Snow
why are we taking on the narrative
Mm-hmm.
of the drug war when, like, this dude, like, needs drugs at this point? Like, we're past the point of, like, well, maybe we'll give you 6 and whatever. Like, no, this guy needs meds. What were you gonna say, Emily?
But it doesn't matter anyways, because I believe that if people want to use substances, they should be able to. And by all means, it's way safer when they're getting a clean supply and it's being monitored by someone. But you know what? This is actually this entire topic, like over medicating, it's multifaceted, but this is a huge issue with bedside nursing, because there are lots of nurses that do the same thing too. They withhold medications, or they make it so incredibly hard to get medications when I can walk into a room, and if I assess my patient, especially a patient that I have some familiarity with, and I know that they're anxious, I can tell that they're having all of these, they're just uncomfortable. I'm going to go immediately and look at their MAR and give them something. Whereas there are a lot of nurses, I don't even know if it's half and half, but it's like a hard line, that are like, nope, they don't need it. They were sleeping, or they didn't directly ask me. And maybe the patient isn't even that verbal, these types of things.
Right.
But you can walk into a room and tell, or we could just take someone's vitals and tell if they're likely to be experiencing unmanageable pain, and medicate them. But it is this morality thing. It is also white supremacy, but it's about that perfection thing that also runs with nursing. Because shit comes downhill, but nobody gets picked on like a nurse does. It doesn't matter if the doctor made the mistake or the pharmacist or whatever. It all comes back to us. So that entire thing, I think, is also a part of white supremacy, because we do that quite a bit. And then there will be patients who it's never a question. They can get whatever they want. It's just about having privilege within the medical system.
Right, exactly.
So, and I think that's always going to be an issue.
Absolutely. Like I heard of this one woman from a buddy of mine who would be getting medicated, but then I'll put it to you like this. So like people at home, right? All the time people take substances, right? So like there's people who they'll take things like Klonopin and then drink alcohol and whatever. But then when they're now in a situation where like they require medications outside of just like what's the word looking for, recreation, now they're in chronic pain and they require medications. It's like, oh no, we can't. Like, are you kidding me? Half of us are addicted to cigarettes and caffeine and alcohol, but we can't give these guys like any serious medication who actually need it. Like, what's wrong?
It's the wrong kind of drug to be addicted to.
We're not meeting the needs of our patient population hardly ever. And I mean, I can look back even 10 years ago. Things were way better. Well, our healthcare system like completely collapsed in 2020, but even 10 years ago, things were way better for a lot more people. And you do see some prescribers that are going the opposite direction, but I know that some of them that just work in emergency med, they're not going to prescribe even a Norco because they don't have to. And because nobody's going to tell them, they get to decide who's worthy of and who's not. And that's how the entire system works. Like right at the top. But yeah, the only thing I have to say to that is I will always be the nurse that will come on shift and I will medicate every single person. And I don't care. It was even if you work in a situation like that, it's better if you have a really good medical director that will give you restraints, even if it's just like Ativan, just something. Yeah. Because if I were stuck in a bed, I would want someone to snow me. I'd be trying to argue to get a PCA pump so I could push the button. But, like it's a miserable life. I don't understand why we have all this moral judgment on people that are at the end of their lives. They're just, they're just trying to maintain. And honestly, they don't have a choice, because if it makes more money to give them dialysis and all this other stuff, then they're going to keep on getting those treatments. Like I've seen people kept in comatose states for way too long. Completely unethical, but that's a whole different topic too.
The thing I was talking about even earlier today was patients who are chronically on heparin and Lovenox. So for the panel and the audience, those two are pretty serious blood thinners. And particularly heparin is not something you're really supposed to be on for a long periods of time. And I was talking to an RN that I actually really like, and I was like, hey, like, you know, why, like, what is the logic here? And they were like, because why don't they prescribe something like Eliquis or Xarelto? And she was like, because it's cheap, because Lovenox and heparin are cheap, so fuck it, you know.
Why use
Company's
low
paying for it.
molecular weight heparin when they can risk bleeding out and dying because of the medication that we're using? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just so much tomfoolery. But all right, so do you think being a Marxist made you a better nurse, or being a nurse made you a better Marxist, or is it both?
I think I would have always wound up with Marx because my journey with that whole thing has spanned decades, you know, but it has made me, I think I'm a better nurse because of my class consciousness. I think I'm a better nurse because of my awareness about living under white supremacy. And I can see deficits, whereas other people sometimes tend to look to be like, oh, well, this box is checked, so look, we're doing good. My mind looks around and sees the misery. My mind looks around and sees like people that are absolutely destitute and desperate. They just want to be treated like a human, and they can't even get that because they're labeled drug seekers and they're kicked out. You know, even like I was saying 10 years ago, if someone were homeless, they would let them on board in like med surge until they could try to find like a placement. And maybe it's more like 15 years ago, but anymore, like they kick elderly women out. It doesn't matter if they have a place to go or not. They're like, you cannot be on the property. You got to go to the sidewalk because that's where the bus station's at. There are no, I used to think that we had standards of care, and by all means, we talk about the standards of care and how that's a real thing, but it's not. Everything in the system that we're taught, and this is like, it starts with education, academia, but it also is like middle management, nurse managers. They repeat and parrot the same stuff too. And it's only gotten worse because it's a highly abusive field out the gate, as well as why it's abusive in school as well. There's a lot of different reasons why it is. And the cliche saying is that nurses eat their young, but it's true. Like it's an abusive field. Absolutely. And some of that stuff in nursing school, you know, making people cry and flunking people out over nothing. We're talking about just nursing theory. It wasn't even, that wasn't going to make or break the nurse. Actually, you know, they needed more technical skills, but just the cruelty in nursing school, I think it at least prepared me. I didn't get it at the time, but it prepared me for the cruelness of the entire healthcare system, because this is social Darwinism every single day, and hundreds of people die every single day, and nobody cares. And they know that they're just discharging them off, and they know that they're homeless, and they don't care. And they come in and they're like, oh, you're a drug seeker. They'll get security to take them out. And it's like, why? Just give them a shot. Like, do something. But the thing is a lot more people, I would think that a lot more people would be getting radicalized. And I do think that there are, maybe that is the truth. But more so than that, I see a lot more people getting jaded and just cruel, and they're losing their humanity, and they don't have the sense to tap out and go into a different field. No, they're still like the front and center. And again, it's really important that I remind everyone that some people, the only access to medical care at all is the emergency department. They cannot get a PCP. It doesn't matter if they have Medicaid. There aren't enough doctors, and doctors don't want to take Medicaid anyways. Same thing for Medicare. But a lot of people can't even get a PCP at all. And, you know, because of EMTALA and some urgent cares, like in the area, if they follow EMTALA, they can go there too. But that's the only reason why they're being seen. And you can't really get medical care in the emergency department. It's all about stabilization, and you're out. Maybe maybe get a referral to a specialist, but we can't, and we do. We're referring people to specialists and they don't have a PCP. Like, come on. It's all a big joke. And so people are getting more jaded, and they're getting more cruel, and they're denying people a sandwich.
It's the same thing.
Go ahead. I was going to say, and just getting shamed, like in regards to
absolutely,
or not having a specialist. Like I had a phone call. I was setting up some benefits that I got for work, and they asked me about a PCP, and I was like, I haven't had insurance for 3 years. Like I don't have one. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
doctors won't see you without insurance. Like a family med or a general practitioner, if you don't have insurance that they take, they won't see you. They won't even let you cash pay anymore. Not in my area. So it's the emergency department where people have to go.
Yeah. I one of the things that I thought about too, like in terms of like like we're saying, like how the laymen don't understand how poor our actual infrastructure, medical infrastructure is. You know, I've worked with this EKG machine that is older than me, 30 plus years. And there was a whole drama that happened weeks back where basically a nurse did like a ton of EKGs and the machine did not print, T wave this, Q wave that, whatever. It was just a pure, EKGs, put the sticker on it, whatever. And there was drama because the provider was like, redo these because I can't read them. And the nurse was telling me they were so upset. They were like, and the way they said it, wasn't very PC, but I get what they were saying. But they were like, we might as well ship this machine off to a third world country because at least then those doctors have to be able to read an EKG without, the little cheat sheet, so to say. And I'm like, you're kind of right. Because in other environments, in other countries, like Syria is a good example. Doctors have to work, sometimes under candlelight and that's all you got, and you have to figure it out. And you would think for, a rural area that, the same idea should apply. You can't just simply rely on the high tech, gizmos and gadgets that we have. But yeah, it's a piss poor system that is not by all means high tech. It's Cuba actually that has the best doctors in the world, socialist communist Cuba, but that's a whole other story.
And a lot of doctors.
From all over. Like they're doing a global Cuba is incredible, a lot of their stuff.
If you ask what's Cuba's number one export, I'd say doctors.
Absolutely.
Yeah, those machines, they get so old that you can't see lines. It's just mostly artifact that it's picking up. But I mean, it is what it is. The United States isn't willing to put money into infrastructure at any level, and it definitely is the healthcare system too. We don't keep up with government computer systems. We don't keep up with roads and anything. It doesn't matter. There are several cities in the United States where they can't even drink their tap water without boiling because of infrastructure, and they're not going to fix it. This is way more widespread than I feel like the average person knows. They'll be like, oh yeah, Flint. And I'm like, no, there's several places. And so I think when we're trying to combat misconceptions with the healthcare field, it's really hard because people are starting off at a different place where they actually think that there is a justice system. They actually think that, of course, we do good things. We have social safety nets. The average person doesn't understand that we don't have any social safety nets. And if you can get them, they're still not going to provide for the needs. How do people survive? They don't, or they have someone else to help them to survive because the system isn't propping anyone up.
One of the things I've seen in terms of white supremacy dominating the medical field is when there are patients of other cultures, primarily Hispanic, which obviously I'm near and dear to as a Hispanic person, is that when somebody who's Hispanic who is chronically ill, there would be a lot of family members would come, all at once and basically just hang out with that person. And I would hear, whispers and murmurs, and not even whispers sometimes, of staff just being so angry that these people were here. And it's just hey man, I'm sorry that whiteness isn't real and you don't have a family and you resent these people, but isn't this what they taught us in the book? That if you want to argue holistic care, that the family is there to support this person. And I don't know, if you don't understand the language, maybe you should advocate for a translator iPad, or I don't know, maybe learn the language. I don't know what to tell you. It's the changing of society. It got to a point once,
but that's a federal requirement, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have to have a translator.
They do. There's a service that can be utilized, but people don't do that because they don't want to actually come up with a solution. They just want to be angry, at the situation. So I wanted to ask you here, now that my phone is closed. So one of the things that I've thought about, and I mentioned it earlier, was I feel like you know, you and I are people who definitely, you know, have had this feedback of being radicalized, you know, both through nursing and being radicalized because of nursing and vice versa. But I also feel like, you know, as we're talking a lot about white supremacy, you know, in nursing, like I feel like there is major potential for a lot of nurses, not even potential, there are a lot of nurses who are just 100% in line with petite bourgeois and bourgeois politics, you know. And it sucks because I remember once I was talking to somebody at one of my jobs, and they were talking about how they were like, yeah, I'm going to nursing school, and I was like, oh, that's cool, you know, like, what do you want to do, da, da, da. And then they were like, oh no, it's only temporary because I just want to get some money so I can buy some houses and be a landlord, kick my feet up. They said it just like that, and I was like, damn. I don't want to talk to you anymore.
Going into nursing for money is kind of a joke because they won't make it. Like I don't know anyone that went to school to be like, oh, I'm going to nursing because I'm going to get paid well. Because it is such a hard job that if you don't have anything going with your heart and like a sense of justice, a strong sense of justice at that, like it's not gonna, you won't make it. I just don't think people will make it, or they're the abusive ones that have people with bed alarms and they don't let them get up. And they know they're going to self-transfer, but instead of getting them like an aid or something, or just getting a gate belt, they just hurt themselves. You can't really do this job just for the money. And also, we're not paid enough. And I understand what a lot of people think, oh, you're paid too much, but we're not really, because we run the whole show. Like pretty much everywhere we're at, it's the nurses that are running the whole show.
Yeah, exactly. 110%. I remember I saw.
So I have some different thoughts. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. I'll circle around. I was just
You're talking about petite bourgeois.
Yeah. So I saw this one, you know, nurse TikTok. I think their name, I unfollowed them. I think their name was Lindsay, and I used to follow them a lot. And then I remember they came out with one video because them and their husband, they're travel nurses and they live in a, you know, RV or whatever. And they were like, a lot of you have asked, how do we afford our lifestyle? Well, number one, we own 6 Airbnbs. And I was like, oh, never mind. Unfollow, unsubscribe. I don't, you motherfuckers. Like, because living that and sympathizing for that petite bourgeois, that bourgeois lifestyle, you're only enabling the reason why the system is the way that it is, you know? But what are your thoughts? I want to hear that.
So I have some mixed thoughts on this because it definitely fits into the stereotype, like someone going to aesthetics, a nurse going to aesthetics, and then opening up her own practice. This also just like state, we have different availabilities to open up our own businesses and things, even as like an advanced practice nurse. So there is a little bit different, but so in my area, there are like some aesthetic places where you can go and get cosmetic treatments, and RNs work there and they can have their own business. There are also some RN IV infusion. Some of them travel around and sometimes you can go there and get that. But also, I feel like it's important to acknowledge that some nurses, like in the Southeast, are still only making like $22 an hour. So they don't have, they're like slave wages is what they're working for. Whereas like California, starting minimum wage is $80 an hour. So even though there is a different like cost of living, like it's not that much. So nurses aren't paid well across the board. And also, you said something earlier that I'm like, we have a nursing shortage, but it's not because we don't have enough licensed, registered nurses. And when they do these things, they didn't even take into account practical nurses. They were just looking at RNs nationwide. There's more than enough actively licensed nurses. They're just not willing to work at the bedside as conditions have gotten as bad as they are. So I will just say anecdotally, and I haven't like looked into this, and I don't even know if anyone's really has any information on this. I have connected with more radicalized people because it is hard to escape the brutal truth when you're down in the trenches. Even as a nursing aide, you are going to be faced with most of these things, especially if you work with the general public. If you work in like a clinic, maybe you're not, maybe it'll be a little bit different, but a lot of people get radicalized because it's impossible to have, I don't know, any standards of like ethics or whatever, and not see people being treated inhumane and unethically every single shift. And it'll be like, well, this person needs this. And it doesn't take long to figure out like, oh, well, we're in a saline shortage. So you can't give IV fluids today. Like we don't have, even in our for-profit system, which we have way more money in medicine, obviously it doesn't work because nobody's getting their needs met. So I see a lot more radicalized nurses, I think, and just people in medicine in general. However, the nurse that you're talking about, I definitely, and that nurse is also a racist. I don't know the nurse that you're talking about on TikTok, but when I see, there's certain different types of nurses, but there are a lot of white supremacist nurses in the healthcare field in the US.
Absolutely.
It's just the way that it is.
Yeah, I feel like I it's really interesting, and I hope I can more on the ground see the difference in nursing sooner rather than later, because I feel like a lot of what I do see is almost the opposite, and it could be a geographic situation where like, yeah, you know, there's a saline shortage now, there's a nice statin shortage, why are all these refugees and immigrants here? Like I see more resentment staff wise than like people connecting the dots, even when I do try to have these conversations with people. But at the same time, you know, we as communists have to pick and choose when it's appropriate to be like, well, you know, American imperialism destroyed South America, and that's why all these people are here. You know, so I don't know. I haven't personally seen within the last year as much as I would like to. But who knows? You know, it could just be particular people. Who knows? But yeah,
well, there are a lot of those people. And physicians too. Like there are enough of those people that are upholding the system and they're happy because they have their needs met and they still believe in bootstraps and all of that. But there are a lot, maybe it just depends on where you're working, but there's a lot of radicalized nurses that do like emergency, psych, even med surge, because you are seeing the worst parts of life that are just, you know, and it's not the people, it's the system. You see like the side effects and the worst possible results of the system so often. And I'm sure like that people can still be jaded and blame them, but it takes a special person to keep that facade up than to just open their eyes and see like people are being treated like shit.
Yeah, absolutely. To touch more on the TikTok stuff, I remember Nurse John, I think, got not in enough trouble as they should have, but I remember they kept posting like figs and Stanley Cup ads, and then someone was like, when are you going to talk about all the nurses burning alive in Palestine? Like, do you realize that these things are connected, right? Like you can't just like, you cannot separate yourself from these things, you know? And of course they just ignore it until, you know, the controversy dies down. But I remember that was a powerful moment for me in my own radicalization when you know, when October 7th, you know, had occurred, and, you know, then it's October 9th and Israel's, you know, bombing the hell. I think they immediately bombed one of the major hospitals in Palestine. And I remember I was working at one of my jobs, and I was in like the storage closet, and I really just like started tearing up because like I was just thinking about the idea of like, what would I do if leaflets just like poured on my building and they were like, hey, we're gonna bomb the fuck out of this building. And I have, you know, 12 young people who are, you know, all contracted and wheelchair bound. Like, what do I do with them? Like, how many can I actually get out at once? Do we get out? Is it safe to go out? What do I do? You know what I mean?
They usually expire. I mean, like in US healthcare history, there's a long history of them expiring and they're just left.
Yep. And it's crazy actually, because in our own emergency planning in trainings, we're taught, hey, if someone goes down, leave. Like, don't like fuck everyone. And it's just kind of like, damn. Like, so what do we like? All right, later, guys. Like, it's
no kidding. They failed survey. So I mean, we don't have escape routes for everything. I guess they're posted, and it's been different facilities, but most times, at least like anything that I paid attention to, we do have fire doors, and they do try to implement like the residents or the patients coming out too. But legally you could just run and the whole thing, you know, and your licensure would be safe. And by all means, that's what most of like the history of medicine and psychology has been like in the Western world anyways. it's been really an experimental type of thing. It's still an experimental type of thing, and we see where the experiment has led to fascism. But I don't think it's safe to talk to people about all of this stuff at your job. But there is a nursing subreddit that you should check out. There's a lot of radicalized nurses on there, just like in general, in the nation.
Maybe we'll post this episode there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
There's a lot of nurses that have a lot to say, but yeah.
That I had a slightly different experience with like nursing. I'm not a nurse, but like the nurses I encountered were very much not radicalized a lot of the times because I grew up in the military with military nurses. So no matter how bad the conditions in a lot of the military hospitals, especially for the civilian military population, are horrendous. But
yeah, scary.
None of them would ever say anything because they're like, I'm in the military, like that. And so a lot of those conversations died pretty quickly. So I actually didn't experience like a proper radicalized nurse until I was like 29.
Yeah.
At least you experienced one, because I'm sure that there are people that haven't experienced any. I came from a military family too, military background. I used to be a military wife. So I know that care, like, just thinking back from that and being so wrapped up in imperialism and not really understanding. I didn't even get it until Iraqi freedom, when there was like protests and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, this is really awful what we're doing. But even when you have those moments of vision, it's still, at least for me, it's taken me so many years to try to pull it all together.
So I want to ask you two more things. But of course, as I'm saying that, I'm forgetting what the first one was. So I guess I'll just kind of go from there. It's kind of a heavy question, though, so I don't know. So what would you say? What is the worst thing that you have seen in your nursing career that could have been prevented if we lived in a socialist or communist society?
I don't know. I think my brain is going to, this is probably not relevant, but my brain is going to a forensic patient. It was at the state mental institution, and they would hold, but this was an adolescent cottage, and they were holding a child there. And he wasn't getting his needs met. They were holding him. I guess they were going to go to court and determine if he was competent or not to stand trial. But anyways, this is the child, and he didn't get any care. And the only care that he did get was they came in because they got a court order to inject him with drugs. And I'm not saying that would not be the case in a communist society, but in my communist society, people would have autonomy. We say it, we promote a lot of things. That's the other interesting thing about neoliberalism and all the stuff that we do. We perform a lot of things, but really we're just anti-intellectual and we're liars. So we're saying, we're gaslighting, we're performing, but what we do in practice is completely different. And I just don't think that it would have been like that. I think that people would have basic dignity and basic respect, especially as minors. But in our privatized for-profit system, everyone is locked up individually. We're into solitary confinement. We're into forcing people to take medication. And anything that happened to that boy, he was a child, was violent, and it shouldn't have happened. He was treated like he was a prisoner. Everything in our society as it is now under capitalism is extremely punitive. And it's taken like, well, if there's a problem, then it's because you have some type of moral failing. But that's just white supremacy. I just would like to think, but I'm also acknowledging that we can never have communism unless we also dissolve white supremacy. Because everyone's liberation has to be included. And so I feel like that one's obvious, but any more lately, I see some people on social media that are calling themselves communists that are clearly supremacists. And I'm like, no, this isn't going to work. Like you're cosplaying, but this isn't real. I just think that it would be different. I just think that people would have dignity, but also outside of capitalism, he wouldn't have been treated like that. A 16 or 15-year-old child being treated like he's a man. Oh, it's because he's brown. Like you could see through that. the way that he was mistreated and abused, and obviously being administered medications against your will is also abusive.
Yeah.
No parents. So I just have seen a lot of things like that. I've mostly seen a lot of heartbreaking stuff where people aren't getting their needs met, or they're just, their hair is matted, they just have scabies, and you can't treat it because they have nowhere to live. And they come back, they come through, but we know that we can't help them unless and until our government decides, it's not going to happen under this government, that everybody is deserving just because they're humans, just because life is special. And we're going to treat people with dignity and respect instead of just talking about patient dignity. It's going to continue to be this way. But I've only been watching this since probably like 2010, like as a CNA. And so it's gotten way more brutal. It's almost 2025. So almost like 15 years later, it's way, way more brutal than it used to be. Just because resources are drying up. And actually, it's just because the cost of everything has gone up. So it's like care costs more and you get less of it.
Yep.
Sorry, did I answer your question? Because
you absolutely did. You absolutely did.
When I think of communism, I think of liberation. So
yeah,
it would be all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, Collective's political line, which is coming, I swear, the very, very long document. In summary, you know, we believe in the doctrine of the liberation of the proletariat, you know, and that means the destruction of imperialism, destruction of white supremacy, the destruction of patriarchy. You know, we cannot have communism or socialism without those things being removed from society at large and in existence, because it just you can't, you know, like the comment I highlighted, you know, you can't be like these, you know, Twitter goobers, you know, infrared ACP goofballs who think, you know, that you could be a white supremacist and a communist. I mean, they're just not communists, you know, they're Hitlerites. But anyways, the worst thing I've seen is people dying with no dignity and being kept alive because of the financial kickbacks and incentives. People who've been left alive for way too long, and I mean, like, are clearly suffering, and it's just like, why are we doing this? And I, you know, it's one part, you know, the financials, and it's another part, like, maybe you know, maybe I have to be fair to some older nurses who maybe are just tired, but it's kind of like, you know, we got to do something. Like, we can't, this is part of the job. This is part of helping people transition. Like, we cannot be afraid of death. Like, it's going to happen, and you have to help that person, you know, cross the barrier, so to say. You know, we can't just let them die in the dark, because you can't just close the door and be like, all right, well, later. And, you know, they'll be alive 6, 7, 8, 18, 20 hours later, suffering. You know, why, you know? I mean, I know why, but anyway, this was a great episode, Emily. Is there anything you want to say before we go?
I just want to ask you, because this whole topic, there is a surgeon, an American surgeon. His name is Atul Gawande, and he wrote a book called Being Mortal. And I don't know what his background is. He's brown. I think he might be an Indian man. But anyways, it's about Western medicine and how we keep people alive, like, for always, and how it's not natural, and how, you know, Marathi Indian. I don't know, and I'm surprised they didn't like make you read that for nursing school, but it's called Being Mortal. It's a good book just in general, not just for people in the healthcare field, about our medical system and why it is unethical, because we will keep people on dialysis for 20 years. Like, there's no dignity in Western medicine, I guess is the point. It doesn't exist because the model is bad.
Right. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Thank you so much for coming on, Emily. This was, but I'd say a lot of fun, but it was a pretty bleak conversation, but it was very informative. I'm really glad that we talked. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for having me.
No, of course. All right. Stick around. We'll see if you could follow, because none of our guests ever follow. I end the show and I'm like, don't leave. Let the intro play out, but then the guests leave, and then I'm like, well, all right. So, outro playing. Bye.